Well, hey there, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy Tuesday morning. Forgive me if I'm a little out of breath to start. Hey, Bashar, good morning. Lucy, a little out of breath. Robert, what's up? Nona, dog just, right as the kids were leaving for school, dog gets out, runs down the street. And so we're just doing a sprint to catch the puppy. There are moments. There are moments. I love the dog, and there are moments that I could do without the dog. I know that's probably not nice to those who are dog people, but moments when I'm having to chase a dog down the street and the kids trying to get into school, it's like, come on, why? So anyway, I think I got my composure. Nothing like running down the street, chasing the dog, hurrying back up, getting online, saying, let's do a Bible study. Cheers to that, right? So we're going to do, hey, John, good morning. Becky, how are you doing? We're going to do Hebrews chapter 6, verses 9 through 12. What's up, Caden? Good morning. Hey, Carol, how are you doing? For those who were on Instagram yesterday, I apologize. Evidently, maybe there was no volume or no sound, so that I did not know. So hopefully, if you are on right now, maybe give me a thumbs up or something. Hey, Cindy, you can say, we can hear you, or I can hear you, whatever it is. But hopefully everything's working today. And hey, good morning, Scott. How you doing? Been there, done that. Our dogs are runners as well. All right. Well, maybe I'll have to give you a call sometime and say, how'd you stop them from running? I just stopped them from running. So anyway, good morning, Jesse. How are you doing? All right. Pam, hello. Let's talk about Hebrews chapter 6, verses 9 through 12. And as long as life goes on, essentially, as long as life lasts, that's what we're going to look at. Okay, Cindy, thank you. You can hear. Awesome. Good. Thank you for that confirmation. So this is what it says. It says, dear friends, even though we are talking this way. Now, this is important because the last few verses, and even the last chapter or more, the writer of Hebrews has been pretty sharp with those who are reading his letter. And he has told them, hey, don't be spiritually dull. Don't keep regressing back. Don't go back to old habits and customs. Hey, we should be moving on from milk to meat. He's been saying all these things. And even yesterday, if you remember, good morning, Rob. Good to have you on. Good morning. Even yesterday, talking about this idea of potentially falling away, of you once put your hope and your trust in Jesus, and now no longer are you doing that. Like, there are some really heavy potential indictments that the writer has written about, and maybe the shoe fits. Some of the readers are like, oh my gosh, he's talking about me. Ever been in that situation? Ever been there where you're like, you hear someone talking and you're like, man, I'm pretty sure that person's been creeping on my profile, or he's somehow got the dirt about me, because what he's saying, the shoe fits. It's dead on, right? Sometimes that's the case. And maybe some of the readers are thinking that, oh my gosh, he's talking to me. But then this is what he says. This is what the writer says. Dear friends, even though we are talking about this way, we really don't believe it applies to you, which maybe for some are like, well, that's good. I mean, I had some guilt mounting up, and I don't want that. So thankfully, he's let me off the hook. Maybe that's the case. But sometimes it is important, right, to talk about things, bring awareness to things. It might not even be reality to you, but just for a check, right? Just as a check in the spirit, a check in the soul to see, am I not maturing? Am I constantly continually sucking, right? As we talked about a few weeks ago, we're just kind of sucking off everybody else and not feeding ourselves. Am I going back to all the elementary things? And he assures, the author assures, at least, he's like, I'm not necessarily saying this is the case about you, but I want you to be aware about these things so they don't become true about you. He goes on, he says, we are confident that you are meant for better things that come with salvation. For God is not unjust. He will not forget how hard you have worked for him and how you have shown your love to him by caring for other believers. And so there is an affirmation that the writer gives here, saying, listen, I know you've been fighting the good fight. I know you have been pursuing the Lord with all of your heart. I know that you recognize the necessity of clinging to Jesus in all things. And I want you to know God sees that, is is praised by that. And this will not be for no reason. This is not in vain that this is happening. This is not going to go to the wayside and it's wasteful. No, that God has seen it and God will use this. And so like what he's saying here, he says, but you have shown such hard work by caring for other believers as you still do. And our great desire is that you will keep on loving others as long as life lasts, in order to make certain that what you hope for will come true. And this is the part that I want to just kind of just camp out on for a moment. As long as life lasts, keep on loving others. That this is the ultimate overflow and byproduct of clinging to Jesus. That when you cling to Jesus and you let his heart become your heartbeat, his heartbeat is for his people. And he loves people. He's a great father who loves his sons and his daughters. And the best way to know, am I maturing or am I growing spiritually dull? Am I continually applying what I am feeding myself with? Am I continually walking in step with the Holy Spirit? In this life, as long as it lasts, the most apparent and continual overflow of that will be continually loving others as long as life lasts. Because for true love to exist, true love has to have the cultivation of fruit from the Holy Spirit. True love has to have a selflessness. True love has to be a saying no to the flesh and yes to the Spirit. True love is sacrificial. True love continues to endure. Trying to love those who are easy to love, as well as trying to love those who are hard to love, as well as trying to love those sometimes it just feels darn right impossible to love. Because this is the love of Christ. Right? And as we cling to Christ, his heart beats within us, then our love for others is what manifests. And so when he talks about you working so hard and you giving your best, he's not even necessarily talking about, perfect church attendance and great giving records and serving in the kids ministry and being a part of a small group and all this stuff. I mean, they didn't have a lot of that stuff, but what he's talking about, the Lord is seeing that you are working hard to love others as long as life lasts. That's a big deal. And in their cultural context, having to love people who were speaking against them, having to love people who didn't want them to say yes to Jesus, having to love even family members who didn't choose to accept Christ, maybe stayed in their Jewish ways and said, no, Jesus is not the Messiah, having to love maybe the emperor of the day and the time, which was the Roman Caesar, and just all the garbage that he kind of put upon their lives. Like, there were so many things that this had practical application for. And he says, as long as life lasts, that's what I want. And I do think it's important to see, it says that the way that you have been caring for other believers, and you still do, that there's something about taking care of the family first. There's something about, like, yes, we are to love others as long as life lasts, but he does give like a special attention to like the way that you're loving believers. Christians should be loving other Christians in the midst of their lives, because we're a part of a giant family called the family of God, called the Christian tribe, if you will. And one of the things that is so sad sometimes is how frequently Christians love to devour other Christians. And as long as life lasts, we're not fighting to love even our own kind. Sometimes it's easier when you see more Christians trying to love people outside the family versus want to love people in the family. And yes, I know sometimes there's some crazy uncles and there's some cousins that are a little wild in there. And there's some family members that say some stuff. You're like, that doesn't represent me, but it doesn't mean you stop trying to love them. You actually try to care for them first. You actually try to step up for them. But Christians have this tendency. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because we're wanting to guard so preciously our theology and our doctrine and all this other kind of stuff. Or if we feel like we're right, we want to make sure people know we're right and we know that they're wrong. And so we're just going to make sure that people know that they're wrong so we look better at being right, or whatever the case may be. But Christians sometimes have a horrible tendency of devouring their own. Have we not seen that in this last 18 months? Have we not seen that over the course of Christianity? And the writer from Hebrews is saying, listen, you, God sees that you have cared for other believers. And so as long as life lasts, keep loving the snot out of your family members. And love your people outside of the family as well, but recognize it starts internally. What would it look like, right, if Christians weren't feeling like they had to devour one of their own. It's the same tendency that happens in families, right? It's easier for siblings to bite each other's heads off and then act great outside of the home, right? It's just a family phenomenon. Like kids are best behaved generally when they're not in their house. And as a parent, I generally get to see the worst of my kids. So when someone tells me like, hey, your kid was fantastic today at school, I'm like, no kidding. I mean, that'd be nice if he was like that in the house because he was ripping his sister a new one today, and or sister was just like screaming at brother. They were fighting. Like, let us not, as being family members, succumb to the comfortability, they're just one of my own kind, and so I can love them less, or I can just kind of let them have it. But no, we, as long as life lasts, love one another. This is evidence of spiritual maturity. This is what he says. As long as life lasts, in order to make certain that what you hope for will come true, says, then you will not become spiritually dull and indifferent, right? He's been talking about don't become spiritually dull. How do I not become spiritually dull and indifferent? Love others as long as life lasts, and love your fellow brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters in the family of God, brothers and sisters for other mothers and sons and daughters and everybody. Like if they're in the family, if they say, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ and my life is submitted to him, sure, your preference might not be prominent in the way they go about worshiping, but let's not let our preferences become priority and think that they're actually always divine, right? And so we are called. If we don't want to become spiritually dull and indifferent, to keep loving others as long as life lasts. Instead, you will follow the example of those who are going to inherit God's promises because of their faith and endurance. That there's a rich legacy and a rich history of those who loved well. And may we be a part of that same rich legacy. And in history, people look back at us in our time and say, man, in the midst of COVID, in the midst of political upheaval, man, in the midst of the inflationary trends, amidst all the government mandates, those Christians, it's crazy how much they kept loving people. It was crazy how much they loved themselves. They loved their own. Like they stuck together. They had empathy for one another, and they had empathy for the people on the outside. They kept loving as long as life lasts. What if people looked back at this segment of history? If Jesus tarries in coming back, and they look at this time in history, and the commentary is, they look a lot like Jesus. They loved people well, and they loved their own kind really well. 3 verses, but a lot to chew on, right? A lot to chew on. So we'll let that be what we end with. Thanks, Sam, for the encouragement, as well as Lucy. And Rob, good words as well. Thanks for sharing. Litmus test, John, yes. Keep on loving others as long as life lasts. So, all right. Well, hey, let that be what guides us today. Have an awesome Tuesday, and I'll be back with you tomorrow morning for the early word, 8 a.m., and we will continue, probably closing out chapter 6. But as long as life lasts, which life is still going on right now, love others. So do that today. Me too. See ya.